Millions of South Africans are eagerly awaiting their turn to be vaccinated, but there are many who may not want the jab. Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi has gazetted new rules for employees who refuse to take the vaccine. To discuss this, we are joined by Labour lawyer Natasha Moni from Moni Attorneys. Thank you very much, Natasha, for your time this afternoon. Of course, it's a personal choice whether to be vaccinated against COVID-19 or not. But for those citizens who form part of the workforce, their decision has ramifications for their colleagues and employers. What does the labour law say about an employee's right not to be vaccinated? Are there limits to their right of refusal?
Every right is limited by our constitution. But yes, they are. You cannot force someone to take the vaccine. However, that is limited too. And our Employment and Labour Minister has issued a directive to all employers to increase their work plan to incorporate vaccinations. They have 21 days in order to do so. The way that they're going to do is they're going to negotiate with their employees. They're going to tell them what the parameters are and the reasons why they would like their employees to get vaccinated. And it's then up to the employees with their representatives, perhaps the trade union, if they have one in that workplace, to discuss it with the trade union. We have to weigh up the rights of each and every employee against the rights of the workplace, the remaining colleagues and employees, and also the rights of the employer. It's a very difficult task, and it does need communication, discussion, and negotiation around it. And let me put it this way. If you work on a production line and you are very close to the person next to you and you work at least an 8-hour day, the chances of you being infected by a colleague or you infecting a colleague is really high. And what the Labour Minister has asked us to do is to consider various issues, consider comorbidities, consider age, consider whether it is a religious infraction for you to get a vaccine. And whether it is against your bodily integrity to get a vaccine, and whether you have any allergies in terms of the vaccine.
Natasha, sorry, I'm just going to jump in there. So you have been listing some of the grounds on which an employee has the right to refuse to be vaccinated, but it's going to be very interesting to see whether employers, or for that matter legally, employees are going to be required to provide any substantiation for those grounds. For instance, if I say, well, I don't want to be vaccinated because I'm religious and it prohibits vaccinations, will I be required to prove that religious history? Absolutely. Look, if you've always been a Christian and now all of a sudden another denomination, or you are there, then you say that you belong to something else that then says vaccinations are the devil, then you will have to prove that you belong to that particular group. You will also have to prove in terms of your allergies. And that would be simple, to get a medical certificate from your doctor. What the Labour Minister has said is that a simple certificate to say these are our concerns should be enough to assist the employer and the employee and the employee's representative to talk around it, to negotiate, to see if there are other ways in which they can protect the employee and protect the workplace. The problem here is this, and it's all got to do with vicarious liability for the employer. The employer cannot allow an employee to infect another employee, and they have to put things in place, such as your masks, your distance, and continuous sanitation and fumigation of the workplace. But if you're sitting at home and you refuse to have a vaccination, well, then the employer must take that into consideration, because your ability to infect somebody else is quite slim. However, if you're working with employees and you've been called to come back to work, to sit with your employees for 8 hours a day, then the ability for you to make a stand against vaccination then is limited, because it is a greater risk that you pose to the employer. Unfortunately, if the employer allows you to be at the workplace and at risk, and at risk to be able to give somebody COVID-19, then the Compensation of Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act will not pay out. And that leaves the employer at bigger risk. So it's a fine balance, Annalie.
Natasha, in your professional opinion as a labour law specialist, do these current guidelines make adequate provision for the particulars of workspaces in different sectors? For instance, as you've said, a production line. Are they equally applicable to healthcare workers as they may be to construction workers, to teachers, as they would be to the corporate environment?
I don't know. I know that teachers want to be vaccinated, and it makes sense. I know that doctors and nurses and people who work around the very ill want to be vaccinated, and it makes sense. So it makes sense for you to protect yourself and to protect others. We're all in this together. If you are adamant that that vaccine is somehow going to cause an outbreak of an allergy that could cause your death, then I would stand my ground and explain that to the employer. The employer cannot fire you or dismiss you or place you on a hearing until such time as they've worked around the problem. And this comes from SAA versus Hoffman in the Labour Court and the Labour Appeal Court, and also in the Constitutional Court. You have to negotiate, and you have to find ways and mechanisms to assist each other. Before you look to dismissal, because there's an inherent requirement of the job that you actually protect yourself and your colleagues.
Natasha, it's worrying that in a lot of cases, big companies have clout. They have funding for labour analysts, for lawyers like yourselves to assist them in this kind of a discussion with employees. Many employees do not find themselves in the same position. What is the recourse for them going to be should they find themselves dismissed because they've refused a vaccine?
My first piece of advice, and you need to be taken in terms of the general question that you've asked me, is that if your employer is saying you need to go in and be vaccinated, they can only do that when you are eligible to be vaccinated. So if you're 20 years old, you're very, very far down the line. They cannot force you to be vaccinated with 60-year-olds. So that's one. If they are unrelenting, then complain to the CCMA in terms of an unfair labour practice dispute, so that the CCMA can then assist you, or your bargaining council can assist you in communicating, negotiating and finding resolution. If you are dismissed, then it's difficult to say whether it's going to fall into a automatically unfair dismissal or a discrimination dispute or a normal ordinary dismissal dispute. But you certainly have those three disputes to look into and see which best your dismissal fits. But we want to avoid that. We want to keep our jobs. And so reach out to people who can assist you in obtaining resolution. But the bottom line is that the employer has a duty to protect the health and safety of every single one of their employees. And that's where, if you are on the outside and you do not want a vaccination, that is where you're going to have to fight the hardest and negotiate the hardest to assist you in keeping your job.